Hello and welcome to today's webinar, CMMC Assessments, Real Stories, Practical Insights, and the Human Factor, presented by NeoSystems. I'm Don Carnevale, Marketing Director at NeoSystems, and I'll be the moderator for today's event. If you have any questions during the presentation, you could enter them into the Q&A area within Zoom. We will have some time at the end of the presentation to answer your questions. Also, we will make the webinar recording and presentation slides available to all registrants in the coming days. Now I'd like to introduce the host for today's discussion, Megan Kennett from NeoSystems. Megan?
Thank you, Don, and thanks to everybody out there joining us today. I'm Megan Kennett, Product Marketing Manager for CMMC Solutions here at NeoSystems, and I'm honored to be moderating what I believe is a truly important conversation and one that not many seem to be talking about. Today's topic isn't about drowning you in updates on CMMC or frameworks or controls. We're here to talk about CMMC assessments and what happens when people get involved, and how to prepare for the gray areas and variances that make every assessment different. So if you've ever wondered how to prepare for the parts of an assessment you can't always predict, you're in the right place. Today's session is about equipping you with the insights you need, regardless of the assessor, their style, or their surprises. I'm joined by two of the most grounded voices in this space, people who've worked directly with contractors and assessors, supported customers through audits, and understand the human side of compliance. Welcome, David Carlino, NeoSystems SVP and Chief Information Security Officer. David brings over a decade of hands-on security experience from startups to large enterprises and knows what it takes to run a compliant, defensible program. He leads both the strategy and delivery of our managed security services, and he's the guy who makes sure theory meets real-world execution. Welcome, David.
Thanks, Megan.
And welcome, Greg Powers, VP of IT and Sales Engineering here at NeoSystems. Greg's been guiding contractors and clients through the maze of DFARS and cybersecurity compliance since before CMMC was even a thing. He's also a proud Penn State grad and U.S. military veteran. Thanks for joining us today, Greg.
Thanks, Megan.
We're both Penn State grads, just to be clear.
Just to be clear.
Very cool. My dad is as well. Next slide, please. All right. Well, the reason why we're here today and the mission we're on is simple: to help the DIB navigate the gray areas of CMMC assessments by shedding light on what varies and how to prepare for it. We'll kick things off with a quick update on the CMMC rule, and then we'll dive into those on how those changes are showing up in the real world. From there, we'll break down the assessment experience, what to expect, what's consistent and what isn't. And most importantly, we'll share stories, lessons learned, and practical strategies you can take with you. We'll wrap up with a Q&A, so feel free to drop questions in the Q&A area as we go. All right, so let's set the stage with a really quick update on where things stand today with CMMC. The 48 CFR rule has been published, which means the CMMC DFARS clause 252.204/7021 is officially in play. Starting in as early as November 10th, 2025, you can expect to see it showing up in contract language. So phase one, contractors will either need to have a level 1 or a level 2 self-assessment completed and posted in SPRS as a condition of award. So keep in mind that the DoD can still choose to require a full level 2 C3PAO assessment in this phase certification if they decide it's appropriate for the work. All right, well, rules set the floor, but field reality really sets the friction. Next slide, please. All right, Greg, with DFARS and CMMC finally moving forward, I imagine your phone's been ringing off the hook. What are you hearing? What are you hearing the most from contractors right now? And if we were to scroll through your last 10 voicemails, what are the top 3 to 5 things people are asking or maybe panicking about?
Yeah, I think, right now, obviously with the rule hitting, the biggest concern today is timing, right? Everybody is thinking about, when do I have to be compliant? And even to a point, when do I have to be fully assessed? And I think right now, the main thing for contractors to take a look at is realize who your customer is. If you are a direct contractor to the government, then yeah, you need to keep an eye out on what's in those, what's coming out of the government as far as any type of contracts you're going after and what's written into those contracts. But for a majority of folks out there, a lot of folks out there do subcontract work. You need to pay attention to your customer. What is your prime telling you need to do? That's what you need to pay attention to. That's what your focus should be. Don't worry about what the government's stating and what their time frame is. If your prime's telling you need to be compliant now and you need to be assessed by a certain time period, that's what your focus should be. I think the second thing is still price. Folks are concerned about price, obviously, is going into this area and what the costs are going to be. I think that's really, to reduce costs and keep an eye on price, I think is where typically companies are going to need some assistance there. Because a lot of times with some companies, you can scale down and limit your boundary to keep your costs low, to go through this initial part of getting compliant, and then increase the size of that boundary as necessary as you get more contracts. So I think costs are still a big issue. Also, still seeing a few things that we've seen over the years that are still happening. A couple of things I'd caution companies on: hearing companies getting gap assessments before when they know they're still going to be calling in an MSP for assistance. Getting a gap assessment on your current systems, where most likely those systems will not be going through assessment later on after you start working with an MSP, might be a little bit of a waste of money and time. So again, don't go for a gap assessment if you think you're going to be calling in assistance for how you're going to be setting yourself up for compliance, because you're just going to be getting a gap assessment on a system that's not even going to go through it, because most likely your MSP will change what infrastructure you're going to be using. Another typical thing we're seeing is in that same vein of thought is that companies going out and buying systems thinking they'll get themselves partway there and then they'll call an MSP. You could end up buying systems that MSP is just not going to use. So I hate to see companies, waste money on things where they think they're helping now. They think they're moving themselves along a little bit. And then all of a sudden they call an MSP up and they're going to put you in different infrastructure anyway. So please be aware of purchasing systems ahead of time of getting assistance. And then that third thing is, things that we've heard for years now is when you talk to companies and then they tell you their IT guy has got it. Just be aware most single IT guys aren't able to do all of this on their own. It'd be very difficult for them to be able to take you through compliance and still do their day-to-day IT. So
yeah, I want to comment there. That's because CMMC compliance is not just for IT. There is
right.
Contracts officers, your human resources folks that are doing personnel and role assignments with hiring managers. There's a lot of decisions to be made around standard procedures. So it's an IT challenge. Fundamentally, you need a good IT architecture. Having an excellent IT person is a great start, but writing all your documentation, representing at a time of audit, doing all the TDM of maintenance, and making sure you're wrapping in all the other components is, I think, why one IT person tends to be a pretty heavy lift for one IT person.
And typically, David, we work with companies that have IT guys all the time, right? It's not like we're always replacing their IT guys. It doesn't mean your IT guys are going to get replaced. Typically, that means they get to do the work you really want them to do when you hand off that compliance piece. That's right.
That's right.
That's right. Yep.
Thank you, Greg and
Sure.
David. That's really helpful, and those are great insights. Clearly, contractors are feeling the pressure and have a lot of great questions. So, okay, so the CMMC rule and CMMC assessment process has been finalized, and so far remains unchanged. Both are spelled out in black and white. So if the process is fixed and all assessors are supposed to follow it by the book, why is it that so many assessments still feel so different? And what do contractors need to understand about this variant of the CMMC assessment process as it's written versus the real world execution of the assessment? And I'll tee this one up for you, David.
Yeah, I think this is a big part of the human element. Security is a abstract concept that happens over time, risk being the likelihood times impact of a given threat. So with security, we're looking at how do we go across the defense industrial base and make sure our data is more secure, meaning, confidential, has the right measure of availability, has the right measure of data integrity. So if we're going to look at security across our defense industrial base, NIST and FISMA have long followed a control orientation to achieve this goal. So write a control set that tries to set standards that companies can follow. Dr. Ron Ross and the NIST organization, we have a ton of respect for them. We're certainly Ron Ross students here. So the concept of how to apply a control framework within the risk management framework to it across the defense industrial base sounds challenging enough. You write standards down that you want everybody to achieve and control requirements. But when it comes to reading that language, interpreting that language, and having two different humans interpret that language, there's inevitably variance in the process. So that's long gone on control assessments. With CMMC, phase 1 pre-assessment is new. This was introduced by the final rule, and it's this change to pre-assessment that I think is really driving now lots of variation in what was a fairly stabilized DIBCAC assessment model, because we're seeing a lot of variance in how people approach pre-assessment. And that's coming out of language in the CMMC final rule and really the cap that speaks to pre-assessment and looking for ample evidence that the OSC, organization seeking certification, is going to be likely to pass. And that variance in pre-assessment phase, whether it's very rigorous or sort of a light touch, just read the SSP, the System Security Plan. If you do the rigorous version, if your assessor is asking for a much more rigorous, we want to see evidence does exist, that you're able to collect it. And for some assessors, that means all 320 assessment objectives. By the time you get to assessing conformity of security requirements, it's almost a cursory review. They don't tell you in phase 1 if you're likely to pass with the information, but they've already seen your evidence, they've already conceived of it by doing a more rigorous pre-assessment phase. So phase 2, same cap, same process, nothing changed, but now with pre-assessment and this rigorous pre-assessment, you move through phase 2 much more quickly. And that's, compared to DIBCAC, who does not do a pre-assessment and does all of the, essentially phase 2 is the start of your DIBCAC assessment.
Excellent. Thank you so much, David. That's great. And then one thing I wanted to ask you about is, I hear that there's a pretty vast difference in how a C3PAO versus a DIBCAC assessment is approached. Can you talk to that? Explain some of the differences and what contractors need to know, and why and when would a contractor engage with either?
Yeah, I think it's not that the CMMC final rule came out and DIBCAC now does not exist. So DIBCAC is the DoD's audit arm, if you will, and they are the team assigned to assess on behalf of the Defense Department. And the Defense Department still has the right to perform mandatory audit, which is, something that they could do for a variety of reasons. It could be a big contract, you could be a new contractor, it could be extra sensitive information. But if DIBCAC is now going to be assessing you, DIBCAC reaches out to let you know that. They're going to schedule their assessment with you on their time frame. So if you had vacation that week, that might not work anymore. They're reasonable a little bit in their date choices, but for the most part, this is something that's going to arrive on your doorstep that you need to be prepared for. You don't have an opportunity necessarily to sit down in the pre-assessment phase and describe your boundary and this sort of, hey, do you think this, are we meeting all the same kind of views of interpretation? The DIBCAC has their own interpretation, and their interpretation is basically set in stone. So with a DIBCAC assessment, unannounced, they're going to show up and you're going to give them your system security plan and documentation ahead of time. But they're not going to see any control evidence ahead of time. So your week of DIBCAC assessment is generally a 6 to 8 hour interview all day. break for lunch, and then they do a hot wash at the end of the day where they help you understand what controls that day you're trending toward met or trending toward not met. A lot of C3PAOs have taken this hot wash concept. We still see that in the industry, but DIBCAC's very rigid about it, ritualistic in the approach. So DIBCAC assessments look a lot alike, assessment to assessment. We've run into the same teams fairly often here. So overall, you're not going to have the same amount of time with pre-assessment and a C3PAO assessor, where if it's not looking like you're going to pass, you don't have ample evidence for pre-assessment, your C3PAO is going to communicate that to you in very specifically why. They're not going to tell you what to do, but they are going to say, after reading your system security plan, after pre-assessment, whether that involved evidence or not, we don't think you're ready to move forward with phase 2. You've not failed an audit. If that happened with DIBCAC, you would have got not met on a lot of controls. In a pre-assessment phase, that really just means assessment phase 2 is going to slide out. So you have a lot more opportunity to control who you pick as your assessor and what their approach is. You have a lot more opportunity to control the time frame. You have a lot more opportunity to talk with them ahead of time, kind of convey your thoughts and make sure your boundary is perfect. Your CUI flows are well understood. So you're with C3PAO assessments, it's much more opportunistic than with DIBCAC.
Thank you, David. That's really, really helpful.
Yeah, and David, I think the bigger difference also, right, is the C3PAO, you get to pick your C3PAO, right? You don't get to pick your DIBCAC team, right? So it's
Great
like
point.
you can go out and dial around and find the C3PAO you're most comfortable
And
with.
that speaks to personality. I mean,
yeah,
I think
exactly.
we work with assessors who would prefer the system security plan as written to the 320
Yep.
assessment objectives. And we've worked with C3PAOs who don't see that as the pathway forward and would expect control narratives for the 110 controls, but an assessment and control mapping with the 320. So personality-wise, when you are talking to your assessors, and just looking across the landscape, NeoSystems prefers the more rigorous version of pre-assessment just on the whole. We would advise you strategically in that direction. Pre-assessment is quite helpful. And I think further, making sure your assessor is going to be communicating well with you, understanding if you have unique areas that they have a technical background in those areas. If you've got a unique information system design, picking assessors who are great at Microsoft when you're on Google, maybe not the best plan. So with some of the DIBCAC assessments we've gone through, the assessors don't understand the technology as well as we'd hope. Nobody understands every technology. And with some builds, with some architectures, you're using particular tools in really key ways, and you explain that in your SSP. But from a person perspective, the human factor, if they don't understand the technology and how it works, you need to spend a lot more time in your control narrative writing to educate your assessor, not just say how you do it, but to kind of go out of your way to add, links to more information and really help to specify for them, especially if it's not common technology or you're using a less common approach.
Yes, yes. And before we move to the next slide, how many contractors are going to get calls from the DIBCAC out there versus a C3 versus needing to go through a third-party C3PAO?
Remains to be seen. I think it'll play out over these next couple of years. I think the expectation is that you'll see CMMC in more and more contracts moving forward with the time frame. So I'm sure it's a mix of how much capacity they have for assessment, how well the community is doing. I'm sure if DIBCAC's out there and everybody's passing with flying colors, then that'll factor into it. But we don't have necessarily insight into how DIBCAC goes about picking their customers and how many they plan to choose each year moving forward.
Thank you for that perspective, David. That's really helpful. All right, we'll move on to the next slide. The human factor as the gray area. So, David, those insights about the CMMC assessment and process are 100% solid, but as we know, assessments aren't run by robots in a controlled lab environment. They're run by people in real-world conditions with all the nuance, unpredictability, and judgment that the human factor brings. So let's dig deeper into that. Okay. In your experience, when we talk about the human factor, what exactly does that mean to you?
Well, I think it really does start with different backgrounds. It's psychology. It's certainly though your education, how you got here. So for me, I came through learning the NIST documentation, have a background in risk management, and gained more knowledge of IT through practicing, through assessing, through working on builds. A lot of people come to assessment from more of an assessor background. So maybe they were before this doing SOC audits, SOX audits, GLBA, other audits. So they come to the picture as an assessor, and they're maybe not a practitioner. I think there are people in the business that come through it straight through business. They're the CFO of a company, and now they're an expert at CMMC. So I think that kind of all those different backgrounds lead to different interpretations of the rules, the history of the rules, the language being used, what systems need to be in place for what. So people that come like us from a FedRAMP background, we are used to the FedRAMP system security plan layout, the way FedRAMP likes their documentation, and we generally echo that in our builds. If you came from a different PCI or other kind of compliance backgrounds, you might lay out your documentation differently than NeoSystems would do. So for assessors, it's like they have to learn they have to learn how you wrote your documentation. There's not necessarily templates for this stuff. So there's a lot of meet and greet and get to know each other and figure out your tool sets going on. You're all from different backgrounds. We're all going to sit down and do what we hope is this objective control measurement thing.
Yes.
But all coming from different places makes for just a really different view on everything.
Excellent. Thank you so much. All right. I'm gonna shift over to you, Greg. Let's flip the lens now. If reducing this uncertainty is the goal, what can contractors actually do to reduce that gray area? How do they prepare for the gray?
Well, a lot of gray area is there because folks, especially for companies who are trying to do this on their own, if they've never gone through it before, they're going to have a lot more gray area. They're not going to be sure, okay, as David's talked about before, what kind of assessor should I be looking for? What can I expect? And, what's the process going to look like? So your gray area is going to be much bigger if you're trying to do this on your own and you have folks on your team who've never gone through this before. No matter how bright they could be and as good of IT folks they could be and everything, it's more difficult if you've never done this before. And again, this is kind of where an MSP can help as well. An MSP should be able to help you reduce that gray area. There's always going to be some, as David was saying, because of the human factor involved. But an MSP should be who's already gone through their own assessment, who's taken others through assessment, should have a lot more experience here and be able to reduce that gray area, because there is going to be quite a considerable amount of gray area there if you're kind of doing it on your own. And
Yes.
Dave, that kind of brings up some of the places where we're seeing the gray area already, and companies that are calling us, when you talk about the control interpretations. Things like significant change, right? Companies are always concerned, do I go through my assessment now when I know I'm planning on a big network change in 5 or 6 months, or maybe getting a big contract that could change number of employees I have. So what's your response to companies, because we are running into that quite a bit, right? Companies saying, should I go through my assessment now, or should I wait till after my big change?
Yeah, and that builds on control interpretation, but it kind of points out that a lot of the gray area right now around CMMC is less in the control writing and more in the enacting the controls and their implementation and their assessment, which is where the final rule comes in. I mean, the CMMC final rule laid out what is truly going to be the cap, what is truly the assessment process, what is truly going to be the assessment guidance around external service providers and cloud service providers. So there's a lot of new information that came out with the publication of the CMMC final rule that is just taking time, I think, to work out among the community. So from a perspective on should I go through audit now, we see that question quite a bit. It's not because the controls are changing. It's not because the assessment process is changing. It's because most of the time the idea around reassessment is sort of looming. People are thinking, well, if I go through assessment right now, but I change my environment up or down, number of people, I add new systems, am I going to have to reassess? We NeoSystems have spoken to our assessors about reassessment several times. It's a conversation you should be comfortable having with your assessor once you pass an audit, pass an assessment. And it really comes down to this idea of significant change. So with significant change, it's a new term for the CMMC community. FedRAMP has a definition. CMMC is more loosely guiding you to, and your strategy needs to be to define what significant change to your system boundary means in your environment. We would write that in our configuration management plans as a configuration change to describe if I go from a Microsoft build to a Google build, that's a pretty significant change. They audited, if you were assessed on your Microsoft build and now you're in Google on Macs, like your system security plan just changed top to bottom on nearly every question, you're very likely in the reassess category. So if that's the kind of change you're talking about, we would look at typically NIST 837 revision 2 for what is significant change. But that's really up to you, the organization, your risk tolerance, your definition of significant change, and a conversation you need to be having with your assessor. So I think that whole gray area right now, it's not controls, it's control assessment process and defining what significant change is.
Okay,
Thank you, David.
thanks. Yeah, and I think the another one we get, David, seems like a bit of gray area is when we get calls from companies who are part of a joint venture, right? And so we're seeing that companies like, how it seems a little gray on there around how to deal with a joint venture. So what's your response with companies that are calling us on those?
That's exactly correct. And joint ventures, similar to subcontractors, but joint ventures have a really specific kind of question in the sense that they've grouped up to deliver on a single mission. So the two different companies are going to functionally act as one in delivery. So there becomes a question about how many system security plans and how many CMMC level 2 assessments. Do we need one that covers both of us? Or do we both need our own CMMC assessments? And does that mean we both need our own information system builds? So I think it's a basic, it sounds often like a basic question, but then it comes down to what is your guys' relationship? So for joint ventures like subcontracting, they're different companies, they have different cage codes, the government knows them as different entities. So the entire system here is around, as an entity the government knows, you're going on record when you put in your SPURS score in PIEE as to how compliant you are as a company. So joint ventures, despite the fact that they're going to both work on the same mission, they are different entities to the government. Strategically, there's a lot of advice in this area. NeoSystems would advise you to have a strategy that both companies do have their own SSP. They do put their own score into PIEE, which means they do both need their own system security plans, because that's where your score comes from. But there's a pathway there strategically for both companies to really use the same information system. And there's a lot of gray area in sharing cloud services among two companies with this sort of notion of what if one of them by accident becomes a cloud service provider. So anybody who's kind of worked in that cloud service provider, ESP, MSP space, that's still a very gray area. So our advice to companies that come to us like this is there's a pathway forward. It generally starts with both companies having a system security plan, but we'd advise that you guys to build more one information system that you're both sharing for cost of operations and to do your paperwork well. So for people in this situation as joint ventures or subcontractors that are really on the same pathway, there's a nice pathway through this, but it's fraught with gray area decisions as you go, undefined kind of boundaries right now.
Awesome. Thank you so much, David. I know you guys jumped the gun a little bit on the stories, and you've already started telling these great stories, so I appreciate that. But I know, Greg, I want to give the floor to you, and I think there's some good, at least one more story to be shared from, the gray area and how these are showing up in a.
Yeah, I think the one that seems to hit probably most companies we speak with, is anything around printing. So printers, removable media, right? I mean, Dave, this comes up, I would say, in nearly every single call. Everything seems good, got a virtualized system set up, all that kind of stuff. And then all of a sudden printing comes up, printing and plotting, right? So,
Yeah.
well, how do you respond when customers come in with those questions?
Certainly printing and external media, media that you're going to be moving around. It introduces the media protection family more formally, and printing typically introduces the physical protection family more formally. These, printed paper media is most certainly a form of media that is covered by CMMC, the media protection family. So if you're going to be printing, you're really opening the door to a new set of questions for at least, 8, 9 controls where you're going to need to describe how people handle the printed media. Are they allowed to handle it anywhere? Are they allowed to take it home? If they take it home, do they store it in their desk? Do they leave it on their kitchen table? So this paper media question, unless they're printing, they're reading, and they're shredding in the office, and that's it. It opens the door to all those kinds of questions. What's the procedure around it? And same for, storage media. And then on top of that, kind of just adding a lot of complication that I just don't think our customers necessarily think of when they're saying, well, I have this desktop printer right here. We are also seeing a lot of variance with C3PAOs, either noting they want to come on site to your office. This could just be, a rented office you have. You've thought through, I'm going to put a sticker on a USB printer. I'm going to put it in there. I have a shredder. I put a CUI sticker on that one, asset tagged it, put it in my inventory. Some assessors want to come see that printer. They want to see the shredder. They want to look at the operational area around it, which we can understand. It may have been tampered with in the interim, right? Other assessors, we don't see them necessarily wanting to come on site or discuss the physical security protections around your printing and your shredding and your paper handling. So not only is printing itself opening this whole, I'll call can of worms when it comes to the printer, the paper, the handling, the shredder, it also kind of has this gray area around the physical operational space and the remote users space that continues to just, in our work with C3PAOs, which if any assessors are listening, you are always right. So we agree with your opinion every time, even though sometimes your guys' opinions don't agree with each other. So in our view, what's right is what your assessor says is right. This is just right now a very unclear area. So for NeoSystems, when we're preparing, this is typically one of the areas in pre-assessment we're directly discussing with the assessor. We want to know your opinion, well, your view on how to interpret these controls. Are you going to be coming on site to assess our printing, our shredding, or not? So definitely worth a discussion with your assessors. Sometimes they want pictures, sometimes they want full-on physical security protection. There's a lot of variance in desktop printing and printing in general, so I don't want to make light of the complex nature of this, but I do want to note it's, we see a wild amount of variance in how people are assessing this.
Thank you, David. All right. So the gray areas are real and they're not going away. But with the right preparation, the right partner, the right strategy, and some of these insights, they don't have to derail your assessment.
Yeah, and we, if we pause there, we did get a question here that I think is a really good one around security protection data. That is one of the most common questions we get. Security protection data with the CMMC final rule is not controlled unclassified information. The government makes clear in the CMMC final rule that cloud service providers that are not handling CUI do not need FedRAMP moderate compliance. And that's a different rendering than FedRAMP, which does have a security-related metadata definition. Within FedRAMP, that kind of data does require FedRAMP providers commensurate it across the board. CMMC drew the line at CUI handling in the cloud. So if the data you're handling in the cloud is security protection data, across the board with our assessment community, that's being assessed as not requiring FedRAMP compliance. Its relationship then to CMMC and equivalence in CMMC, we are typically seeing that the controls need to be met for which the provider is involved. So the question here asks about patch management tools. If the patch management tool provides you a SOC 2 certificate, we have provided those to DIBCAC, and then you are proving that the tool is doing the security protections it's supposed to, and that you've securely configured it, you've applied your account management to it. But I can say for sure we have taken patch management tools through DIBCAC assessments that have SOC 2 compliance. There was no question about FedRAMP moderate compliance for them. If your patch management tool has remote desktop and you're pulling up CUI on the screen, that's going to be a different story. But functionally, security protection data in cloud service providers does not require FedRAMP compliance based on the DFARS assessment scoping guidance and the CMMC final rule.
Fantastic. Thank you, David. All right, we're going to move on to the top 10 lessons learned and key takeaways. So we've talked about CMMC assessments. We've unpacked the gray. We've shared stories, variances that can impact your assessment experience and outcome. Now it's time to get tactical, because if there's one thing that we hear from contractors post-assessment is I wish I'd known that going in. So what would you say are the top lessons learned and key takeaways from your assessment experience? We'll start with number 10.
Yeah, I was going to say,
Countdown.
I'd say 10 things. I think in terms of, like we've noted, with gray area, shying away from it is not the right idea. Assessment is a bright light, and embracing the concept that you don't know, that's a fine answer. You need to endeavor to know, but from looking around at where you have a good build or where you don't know if you have a good build, is this CUI or not? It's better to let those things stay in your security roadmap and POAM and deal with them as appropriate. Ask all the questions, get a second opinion. Don't shy away from the gray areas, but embrace them and make sure that you have a good handle on what they are.
Excellent. Number 9.
So as noted as well, pre-assessment, you can do some companies will offer you both options. You can do a less rigorous pre-assessment, a more rigorous pre-assessment. I do want to note as well, there was a question to Greg's comment around pre-assessment and readiness assessment. So I'll note that here. Pre-assessment, it's a great opportunity for you to make sure your ducks are in a row. A more rigorous pre-assessment, it's an opportunity for you, if you were not embracing the gray area, to notice, well, I don't actually have a control answer for 347A, so as you really get down to brass tacks there, readiness assessment is very helpful. It is very important if you are in a position with your C3PAO where you want them to do a readiness assessment. We do recommend it. It's gives them an opportunity to see your evidence even more than pre-assessment. So if you do opt for readiness assessment with your C3PAO, again, they're not going to tell you how to do it better, but it's a great opportunity to practice, to get through your mock assessment or readiness assessment. It's a great opportunity, I think, for your leadership to understand how much effort goes into assessment, and how much rigor has to go into change control and inventory and continuous monitoring, which can often seem a little bit like fluff until it's time to sit down and do this. So pre-assessment and readiness assessment are both really opportunities. To Greg's point, don't do a readiness assessment if you know you don't have anything in place. Hire an MSP or some kind of company that can give you advice rather than hiring a C3PAO to do a readiness assessment. If you don't have an inventory, you're not doing change control, you've not drawn an authorization boundary diagram and data flow diagrams, your assessor is not going to be able to tell you much other than you didn't do A, B, and C. So are we really going to be able to say X, Y, and Z at the end? Like, probably not. So a readiness assessment is not the right idea. If you are seeking advice, find a consultative organization, an MSP, rather than a C3PAO.
Great. Number 8.
Speaking like an assessor, so I mentioned NIST and Dr. Ron Ross. The NIST lingo is its own lingo. It's a powerful language that covers the information system landscape really well. So the risk management framework talks to the organization level, the mission level, the system level. And when we get into writing a system security plan at the system level, this lingo is important. So it's not, these aren't made up words that nobody's ever thrown against the wall. NIST has spent many years refining the terminology, publishing new glossary, working hard to codify a set of terms that relate to each other in a meaningful way, media compared to information systems. So the NIST glossary, the NIST Special Publication 800 series, sort of following through that whole realm. If you are going to take yourself through assessment, or you really just want to show up at assessment and be truly prepared, that NIST Special Publication 800 series, risk management framework, conduct risk assessment, computer security incident handling guide, these are critical terminology and verbiage to work off of.
And may I add, the CMMC assessment process is also a wonderful resource, and it is available to everybody out there.
That's a great point. The CAP and the CMMC final rule make for honestly much more thoughtful reading than I think most people would assume when they think of government writing. It's well done and lays out a lot of critical details.
Number 7.
So your system security plan, this is laying out a plan. It's about accomplishing your plan. It's not a marketing document. It's not intended to be a marketing document, and probably you don't want to share it with other people. The point of CMMC, having your own assessor. We just talked through all these interpretation questions, and you're going through an assessment for 8 hours a day for 5 days in a row at DibCAC, and you get in the elevator in your hotel, and this person's like, well, I don't think that's compliant. Like, well, I just spent 40 hours going over all the intricacies of every one of my details for the purpose of expressing control compliance, and we'll run into problems with people who are kind of like, well, that's not my interpretation. So, your SSP is not meant to be for everyone. It's meant to be for your assessor, and you're meant to go through it not lightly, but in a great amount of detail on every single part. And you're supposed to come away with met, not met for each control based on this larger body of knowledge and in your context. So when you're writing your SSP, you're not thinking about sharing this with your friend. You're not thinking about sending it out for marketing. It's a controlled document that should only be shared with a need to know. It's a highly sensitive document, and you're really trying to write it not to make yourself look amazing, but to make yourself look compliant.
Excellent. Number 6.
So anyone who did the SANS top 20, then the CIS V7, then CIS V8, and then the NIST Cyber Security Framework, all of these start with this notion of identify, protect. And CIS would say identify your hardware, identify your software, identify your administrative privileges, log. These identify before protect. It speaks to, from security, the concept of coverage. And then coverage being, does the tool apply everywhere it's supposed to? That this is a fundamental question about compliance and observably true compliance. If you have Defender deployed, do you have Defender deployed everywhere it's supposed to be? So that question about supposed to be is an inventory question. It's a critical element of zero trust. It's a critical element of, really any risk management framework. It's a critical element of communicating with your assessor what's inside your authorization boundary, what talks to what ports, protocols, and services are allowed. If you don't have a clear foundation on your assets, your people, your software, your accounts, and how they're all laid out, getting into these nitty-gritty questions about, have you specified exactly where malware is supposed to be, and then is it there? So while inventory, I think a lot of people put at the end, or it's just something they're kind of loosely working on, strategically, we'd say focus most on it from a security perspective, have a very good handle on what's in scope, and ask all of your control-based questions with coverage in mind before you move to what Dr. Ross would call strength of mechanism, looking at your across your landscape, your tool set to make sure they have the right strength for the risk tolerance for your compliance.
Number 5.
So the human factor on training. It takes a long time for companies to come to a training deck. The information, the content that might go in these trainings, these are going to be security awareness training, role-based training, think CUI handler training. If you're just using a tool off the internet, that's one thing. If you're going to build your own content and you're going to make sure that roles you've defined in your personnel list for your system security plan, that you're training all these roles, you're probably going to need to make some of your own content. For NeoSystems, we provide you a package of content, but even if we give you a package, companies like to talk to their own employees in their own tone, often on their own slide decks, or within their own tool. And so the content gets out there quick, but then the refining of language and making sure it's approved by leadership and then actually getting the training to everybody who's on vacation and out for leave and, keeping record of training. It's not quite big enough a lot of the time to buy a learning management system. A lot of people do this as an enclave, and you're like, well, I don't want to use my learning management system for this time, what seems to be a small effort. It's still pretty manual. If it's manual, it takes forever, and it's high risk if you have no tool at all. But it takes a while, and so you finish your system security plan. Now you have rules of behavior, and now you have training that goes with your system security plan. So everybody kind of is like, I'm going to sign my system security plan the day before I finish audit, so I have the most time to get it out the door. That introduces this problem that your system security plan is a prerequisite to your training material about your system security plan. So we see a lot of people run into audit trouble with training because they only finished their SSP the day before, but they did training last year, which wasn't on this SSP. So, it's a bugaboo, I think, in terms of order of operations and then just the length of time for the human factor to get it all done.
No, that's good. That's really important too. Thank you. Number 4.
So I think having gone through tons of assessments over many different types of audit regime, different control frameworks, assessment itself is an activity. And I think a lot of people lose sight of this, that every so often you're going to have to make this whole stack, at times thousands of things, available to your assessor. Some assessors have a tool that they authorized in their boundary. They took their DIBCAC assessment when they became a C3PAO that's authorized for them to provide to you. A lot of assessors do not, the majority in our experience. So some send out a guide that says, give every file a file name. Use a naming convention on every single file. For every screenshot, you're going to, put in the control number, maybe the assessment objective. That's tough. If you're going to use the same screenshot for 5 different controls, are you going to save that same screenshot 5 times? Are you going to just save it one time and reference to 5 controls? So there's a whole strategy here that you as a company need to make and try, probably try. If you're working with an MSP that's been through this process, they very likely have one. We do. We put a lot of thought and effort into how we prep for us, for our customers, for our assessors, so that you can get this stack of evidence over to them. They can read it, they can make comments on it, they can tell you they want a new copy. The whole process of assessment involves a lot of data movement, and a lot of this data is very sensitive. So just stacking it all up one time is hard. Thinking through how you're going to share it with your assessor, communicate on it, save it off for 7 years as hashed evidence, later, takes some thinking. So don't roll into audit without a strategy here. Either an agreement with your C3PAO or an internal process you're going to use to collect it up and stack it up.
Excellent. And finally, our top 3 lessons learned and key takeaways. Greg, do you want to? I think you guys are going to.
I'll let David start on the 3. Yeah.
I want to talk with Greg about this Scope Smart. So Greg and I work together on a lot of sales, on a lot of changes to sales we've made before. And I think scoping smart and knowing your boundary, I think for a lot of the conversations we have, there is a naivete about how complicated their information system layout is. So we'll have a whole conversation. We'll make what sounds like a beautiful solution. We're implementing it. And then we find out there's a file server over at somebody. They download it, take it to the CEO's house. And actually, this pretty picture we thought was going to be the answer is not going to be the answer. So Greg, I want to talk about sales conversation, knowing your boundary. Where do you think the community's at with this right now?
Yeah, I think that's one of the tougher things, because also it kind of depends, like in the sales process, who's the person that's even calling us, right? It could be somebody that's not as familiar with the IT environment. It could be somebody that could be a senior management person that signed a contract with another MSP or another provider that they intend to replace, so they can't ask questions of the current provider. So
That's a great point.
they're just not sure what's in their environment, where their environment's located, who their providers of their different systems are. And so the boundary, just most folks got to understand, is as much as you can get through with an initial process through conversations, emails, those kind of things, until someone really gets in there and starts looking at it with you, then just, companies got to realize that, expect that the boundary could change from what was initially agreed upon or thought about or contracted, because it can be tough for companies to understand the full boundary. And many times they find out that certain things were CUI that they never realized.
Which is fine. I mean, that's part of the journey.
Yeah,
So I think in
exactly.
our earlier slide about don't be naive, embrace gray area, get a second opinion. That includes from you only ever save one place, one time. They never touch the UI anywhere else. Maybe ask more questions than that. Poke and
Yep.
probe, right? Help people understand, like, well, can you show me where you save it on the file server so I can really make sure that's the file server? Because I think from an end user perspective, we all know what we do and we get in the habit, and you're kind of just clicking buttons doing things. And then you only do something once a month. You're
Yep.
like, oh yeah, that's right. And then I also back it up to this cloud. Is that a
Yeah.
big deal?
Yeah.
And
Is it
yes,
okay if I
I
take it
could say
home with me
right
at
now,
night?
if you back up your CUI to the cloud, that is a big deal. And we run into that one a
Yeah.
lot.
Yeah.
Well, all right, somebody set that up a long while ago. We all forgot. That's, again, it's totally fine. But that's all the process of knowing your boundary, understanding where your data is flowing, documenting as you go, because 3 months later, you can't remember what you discovered before. So having a good inventory, keeping track of your plan, tracking your POAMs, that is how you stepwise move forward. But really understanding your CUI data flow. I do joke with people still are, what is CUI? And that's a community-wide challenge. The definition is really elusive at times. Um, so do be
Yep.
aware your boundary might be elusive to track down and scope smart.
Excellent.
Yep.
Excellent perspectives. Thank you so much. Number two.
The structured approach. So when you run a system security plan, when you've written a system security plan, you're putting forward a plan. And if you don't have a structured approach to achieving the plan within the boundaries, and really starting to put rules in place for how to approach this systematically over time, you're going to run into some challenges. You do need to follow the plan you wrote. So the plan does in fact have to be achievable. And I think also it needs to be well understood by all the people who are going to implement it, which means training and rules of behavior. So you can't quite make a plan without any monitoring to see if your plan's in place. You can't achieve your plan just by monitoring, because monitoring is going to tell you that you didn't do change control. So you have to have a plan that includes this structured approach to information system management, configuration management, so that you, once authorized, don't drift, that you end up staying in that same good place, maintaining compliance long term.
And I think, Dave, that we have that discussion a lot of times, like in the sales process too, is one of the things, about being able to have a plan is the company supporting the plan. And so senior management involvement, right? So it's very difficult to put a structured approach together, to have those guardrails. If the IT team is just trying to push that out and other parts of the company go, I'm not going to do that, right? So without that senior management involvement, without the ability to say, hey, we're going to do this because we have to get compliant, we want to keep our contracts, whatever it is, it's very difficult to have that a full structured approach, to be able to set guardrails, to be able to sit there and, like you say, follow the plan as put down for your compliance requirements.
Absolutely. I'm so glad you talked on that, Greg, because it does start with leadership. It
Yep.
starts at the top. Absolutely. That's great.
Yeah, number one, be honest. I think from an assessment perspective, Neo is not an assessor, so we don't play this, extra special smart game that the assessors have to play to really be the final interpreter of all the rules. What that means to us is there will be gray area per assessor with interpretation of rules that don't have clear precedent. So the best approach is to be honest with yourself, with your assessors in your writing, be defensible about why you made decisions you made, really assess security impact as you make some of these changes, being upright during the assessment process and with each other ahead of the assessment process, embracing the gray area, documenting honestly where you think you might have changes. And really, as a defense industrial base, if we're going to achieve a sense of risk management and security, there is the human element of administrative controls. Don't cut corners when you're sending CUI just because you're not going to get caught. If the whole community can kind of look at these rules of behavior and security awareness trainings with a measure of honesty, it makes the process of then collecting evidence more direct. And it makes the assessment process a lot more above board. Avoiding any kind of appearance of dishonesty with your assessor is critical. And just in general, it's not a great strategy. So our number one assessment guidance here would really be honest.
Yeah, and that includes from the very beginning of the process, even when you're talking, if you're going to go and work with an MSP.
Yes.
If there's something you're not sure about, where all your CUI is, or you're not sure about the process that maybe one of the departments goes through, make sure you're upfront about that. That way, when your MSP begins working with you, they know, hey, we got a question here. We got it. We're going to have to figure out, because otherwise you could go down a path of thinking this is the path to compliance. We already agreed on this. And then you get about 3/4 of the way there and you find out, oh, wait a minute. We forgot to tell you guys that, yeah, we do have this one other system over here. It might have CUI in it, right?
And even during assessment, if that happens, just tell them, right? So if you're in a position where you were supposed to go get a piece of evidence and you go look and FIPS mode's not turned on, report back. Don't try to paper it over. That's never a good approach.
Yep. Be honest, right?
Thank you. Thank you guys so much. All right, real quick to wrap this up, I've got a few closing thoughts. If there's one thing that we hope you'll take away from today, it's that CMMC assessments aren't always straightforward. They're not always black and white. It's not always about frameworks and controls. It is about navigating the gray, embracing that up front, and those human factors that make every assessment different. So the CMMC assessment process might be written in black and white, but the experience is created with people in a real world environment. And at the end of the day, as Greg was talking about, as you heard David alluding to, it's leadership that's going to set the tone. They're going to, by reducing the noise, choosing a partner, a strategy, a team who knows the terrain. CMMC is not just about compliance. It is about protecting what matters most. And that kind of readiness does start at the top. So I just want to thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Greg. Thank you, David. This was a great conversation, and I hope you all enjoyed it. Don, would you like to wrap things up?
Yeah, thanks, Megan. We have just a few minutes here as we get close to the top of the hour. So we've got some questions. So I'd like to pose these to the panel and see if we can get some relatively quick answers here. The first question, what happens if and when I fail an audit or a control?
With the final rule, you can, if you're not met on a series of controls, you can POAM them. There are also a series of controls that cannot be POAM'd. That mostly is around whether they're 1 or 5 points. That's not perfect guidance, but some controls, generally the 5-pointers, you're not allowed to POAM, meaning you're not allowed to have a gap and write a plan of action milestones and remediate in 90 days. So for some controls, you can do that. For the non-POAMable controls, that would call for reassessment. So when you're doing readiness assessment or during the pre-assessment phase, making sure all the ones that cannot have a plan of action milestone that will cause reassessment, that you most certainly have those ones in place is a great start.
Okay, thanks, David. Next question. How do I get my evidence to my assessor?
This is an open-ended question with your assessor. Your assessor may have a tool for you. They may not. They may be saying, well, how do you plan to share your stuff with us? You're going to give us a SharePoint site or some kind of thing. So NeoSystems, with our companies, we bring a tool for the job. You'll want to have an answer here. It's not clear cut. It depends on who you're working with as to how you'll do it. DibCAC is going to have you put the stuff in a spot. They'll bring one, but for C3PAOs, you'll need to arrange that with them.
Okay, and this will be our final question here as we wrap up. And I think both of you can, David and Greg, can chime in on this. How long does it take to get through an assessment? How long does that process take?
I think if you're talking about preparing for an assessment, like let's say you're going to sign up with an MSP or something like that, it does depend on the solution you're going with and your size of your organization. Typically, if you're trying to go with just a small virtualized environment, a lot of folks call those enclaves, and that's all you're going to do, then you might be able to get through it in 3, 4, 5 months. Kind of depend. There's some factors involved there. If data migration has to occur, so you might be able to do it much quicker in that manner. If you're trying to get your whole infrastructure compliant, you have on-prem systems, workstations, may deal with some things like we talked about, like printing and those kind of things, then I would expect most companies to expect it's probably going to be a good 12 months, and it could be as long as 18, depending on the size of your organization.
And that's
just
for
to
prep. I would say
prepare.
once you call your assessor and they're saying phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, we typically are seeing phase 1 be some 4 to 6 weeks, depending on how rigorous it is. For meetings, for pre-assessment, scoping guidance, for getting them your paperwork. They typically want your paperwork some 10 days before they're going to do assessment, at the very least, right? So with that, we typically see some 4 weeks for phase 1, 4 to 6 weeks. Assessors like to do the phase 2 assessment quickly. Some follow the exact 1-week model from DibCAC, some stretch into 2. But sort of 4 to 6 weeks for pre-assessment, 2 weeks-ish for assessment, and about 2 more weeks for reports. So anywhere from 8 to 12 weeks for the actual assessment itself.
There was one question I saw that I wanted to answer, and that was, how do you know, like, how is a contractor going to know whether they need a C3PAO assessment or DibCAC?
DibCAC will make you aware if you have a DibCAC assessment coming. If you don't, you can go find a C3PAO. I think I would also note that anyone can go hire a C3PAO in any business, no matter what you do. So if you're out there and you want to see CMMC level 2 certificate, you've never processed CUI, but you're going to build a system that could potentially, go for it and find an assessor, write a system security plan. If you never get any customers and you're just trying to do this because you want to have customers, that's fine. C3PAOs are for-profit auditors, assessors. If you are just trying to get in this business, you don't have CUI yet, there's nothing precluding you from going through the process. If you're an external service provider that doesn't handle CUI, you can go through the CMMC level 2 certification process just in case anyway. So there is no bar to who can sign up for a C3PAO, but DibCAC will tell you if you need to do a DibCAC assessment, either mandatory or just through their process programmatically.
And do we have room for any more questions or time for any more
I
questions?
think we're going to wrap up. We're already a few minutes after the hour. So those of you who have submitted questions that we did not get to, we will get those answered and be in touch with those responses. I wanted to thank Megan, Greg, and David for the presentation today. A lot of great information. As I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, we will be in touch with links to the presentation recording as well as the presentation slides so that you can review those and or share those with your colleagues. So again, thank you all for attending today, and we look forward to seeing you on the next NeoSystems webinar. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Take care.